Yes, indeed, it is the first the polling station ever recorded with Queen Elizabeth not in the world. It's our first one since the death of the monarch. I think regular fans of the show will know that we're a rather left-leaning podcast. I think in many respects we have maybe we have different views in the monarchy, but we'll talk about it. I was away. I was out of the country, as was Paul. William Kedjanyi was deep in mourning, actually, as he will talk about. Front of the Phoenix today, which I thought was quite funny. Well done to all who waited so long, says Camilla. Especially me, says Charles. This was obviously in relation to the 12-hour queue in which David Beckham toiled. Did you toil, William? Were you in the queue?
I was not in the queue. I did toil to go and see the funeral procession on Whitehall. So I left home at 4:30 a.m. Got 20. The only place to open was meant to open at 8, but their staff got stuck in the crowds, so that was delayed by about 90 minutes. And then I had an utterly fantastic time. I have to say, I thought the atmosphere there was brilliant. I'm a bit wary of calling these things quintessentially British, because I don't think decency is limited to just this island, but I must say it was a wonderful atmosphere and a real sort of celebration of what she had on Monday, and that makes me sound like a very dyed-in-the-wool
You're
monarchist.
such an anachronism. You're such an anachronism. I can never figure you out.
Yeah, a lot of people might be thinking he's not a royalist or a monarchist, but it was, I would say, an utterly spectacular thing to have gone and seen. And as for the queue, it became sort of the subject for, 10 days over here. People just talking relentlessly about the queue, in which it became literally a place where people just broadcasted from, had their entire lives from. I bet you there'll be people who will get married from the queue, have kids from the queue, or all of that. Yeah, it was quite a thing. I didn't go to see it, but I'm in awe of everybody who did. The last thing I did that was 14 and a half hours was a polling station live stream. I got to sit down for most of that, and even then during some times I nearly passed out. So yeah, well done to all who managed to make it through the queue.
What did you make of it all, Paul? Even in death, the Queen is potentially facilitating marriages of people who've never met before.
I'm sure she is. I'm sure that was the case. I mean, in honesty, my view on the subject is I'm really just not that interested. I wouldn't be if I was creating a state from scratch. No way would I create a monarchy. But having said that, having lived in Britain all my life, I wouldn't scrap it, because I think that if we became a republic, we would just pick whoever Rupert Murdoch told us to pick. And actually, in that sense, the monarchy is a source of stability and relative moderation, I suspect. But regarding the whole, mourning period, if I'm honest, I was in Greece, and me, I've got my eyes on the globe most of the time. I'm far more focused on Ukraine and the wonderful imminent demise of Vladimir Putin and everything that's happening in America. But look, I've got nothing against the Queen. I think the Queen has done a very good job for the country. I think she's a stabilising force, and it's always sad to see someone dying. I think I had no interest in kind of intervening in other people's mourning or anything like that, so I just stayed out of it.
That's why I love you. Like, essentially what you said there is exactly my thought on it. I actually have a good time for the Queen. I think she was a powerful source of good in Ireland in latter years. I think she did a lot of good. And there are so many stories out of this, politically or otherwise. Sinn Féin have emerged best of all in the Irish context, where clearly Charles met Jeffrey Donaldson in Belfast, basically made a show of him, like absolutely made a show of him, and was, if not fawning over Michelle O'Neill and Alex Maskey, was in very, very good company, William. This was one of the most striking things. Lots of things have happened in Northern Ireland in recent times. Sinn Féin becoming the biggest party. Sinn Féin actually saying the term Northern Ireland, which wasn't reported as much. And what happened last week, and if we want to talk about this in a political context, was staggering for me. Sinn Féin actually had this really, really tricky situation and nailed it.
Yeah, we've seen a huge amount of consequence in Northern Ireland over the past few years, and we've probably seen what might be decades worth of history down the line, crammed into a few months or so, including not only the King's first visit, but also I think news on the census today. And yes, I think very much the relationship between the visiting royals and also Sinn Féin, which I think is not to be underestimated, particularly as Stormont has never been needed back ever as much as it is right now. And there are an awful lot of questions, again, piling up about how government plans and policies intended to help people are going to help people of Northern Ireland if Stormont isn't there basically to implement them. So that was really significant.
Let's talk about Liz Truss in terms of she's had a whirlwind. So she meets the Queen. The Queen is dead within a few days. Strangely enough, and one shouldn't necessarily say this, but Boris Johnson could have been saved had all of this happened, whilst because politics is so bizarre. He handled himself very well in his speech as well, to be fair. He actually has somewhat redeemed himself in the eyes of some, but it's on to you, Liz Truss. Now, lots of issues here. Rees-Mogg is in the news because of the fracking issue. Liz Truss is facing recession, so on and so forth. Talk to me.
Okay, so let's run through any idea of a Truss bounce, first of all, to get a headline on how she's doing. Owen Winters, who is the co-founder and co-director of Make Votes Matter, put up this excellent graph. He's taken data from Pollbase Pro, and 14 days after Truss, as 1.2% rise in Politico's polling average. Now, comparing to previous prime ministers, if I've managed to get this to fit properly, it'll be on the screen. If not, I apologise. Johnson got 2.3, same for Brown, same for May. Comparing to others, Douglas Home, Callaghan and Macmillan were naught, and Major was minus 2.1. So nothing much really doing. It's sort of as you were. There have been some fluctuations in the Labour poll lead, but we're not talking huge things. We're not talking things I would say that would confirm or rebuff any initial views I think you had about, say, Truss versus Starmer, or how Truss will do going forward.
What do you make of it, Paul? She's, in fairness to Liz Truss, she's gotten the job. She's replacing one of the worst prime ministers, arguably, of all time, but this is not straightforward.
No, and I think regarding the polls and any bounce, I didn't expect it to be a big bounce, but they have ticked up a little bit. Labour's lead has dropped a little bit, not significantly, and I've seen her leading Truss, Starmer with Redford and Wilton. I think that what simply that reflects is that she's uniting the Tory vote again, right? Because she hasn't done anything to, destroy her own character in the way that Johnson did every 10 minutes. And I think that if you look at a lot of polls recently have been around the 42 Labour, 34 Conservative. I think that's where we'd be if we got a general election. I think that's a pretty, we're not going to see the Conservatives get below 33, 34 in election. Now, regarding what that means for the betting, leaving aside the next election for a minute, the idea that Truss is going to be removed early, I find that very unlikely. I just think that the agenda she's pushing, the narrative she's pushing, will please Conservatives, right? And so, therefore, there's no reason why they would dump her. And especially as...
There is an element, sorry, Paul, to interrupt. There is an element, though, also of the party has become such a calamity, and Boris was such a disaster. A steady hand, even a vaguely competent steady hand, should carry for some time.
Yeah, I'm not sure it will be competent, and I'm not, because not least when you've got people like Mogg in the cabinet, and I think Kwasi Kwarteng really is on another planet on a lot of subjects. So, and there's there's all sorts of characters, and another issue that we should maybe get onto is Joe Biden cancelling his meeting with her on Sunday. I mean, that's extraordinary. That is unprecedented, right? And, I don't think the special relationship is really much of a thing, right? We are an ally of America, obviously, but we're hardly in the same ballpark in terms of power. But it's quite extraordinary. And it comes on the back of her chief of staff being outed as being under FBI investigation and done a deal with FBI apparently and in National Crime Agency investigation for election rigging around the world. This is part of the Trump scam, right? So how long he lasts is, you know, anyone's guess. I wouldn't imagine very long. But is it any wonder that Joe Biden would cancel their meeting, right? Given that his main issue is the state is saving Western democracy, right, from MAGA, from extreme MAGA Republicans, as he calls them. So the special relationships in big trouble. The EU trade deal, the US trade deal, which was always a fantasy, but that has now already.
Well, it's basically been confirmed. This ain't happening anytime soon, if at all.
Yeah. So in other words, the thing that Barack Obama told us 6 years ago is completely correct. And, you know, we've wasted 6 years of these people shouting at anybody for telling them these uncomfortable truths. So this is all going to be a big headache for Truss going forward. The economy is a big problem going forward. But at the same time, I see her delivering a Tory agenda and keeping their base happy. And equally, I think, given what's happening in Ukraine, I think that the economy might recover next year. I don't think things will turn out as bad as maybe we once thought. I think we'll have a very hard winter and there will be a slight improvement next year. So she may well be able to sell some kind of narrative about recovery and, you know, there being steady hand. And that's something certainly that the opposition should beware, right? The idea that they've lost the argument on economics is really not the case yet. There's a lot to be played out.
Yeah, there's a lot there, William. The UK Foreign Secretary meeting his Russian counterpart, I believe, today, Thursday as well. And there's a lot to talk about there. I'll leave you the floor because Paul mentioned Russia and I suppose the notion that Putin is kind of losing the war, which he may well be. Funny enough, I was texting a friend in Iran today who was basically texting me and saying, I hope you get this message because they've shut off social media. There's a lot going on there as well. And obviously in the US, I mean, every day Donald Trump seems to have something more absurd. So I don't know. What do you want to talk about, William, I guess?
I just want to bring up a point regarding the base and, you know, how basically the Tories can't go below a particular floor with regards to what it might do for prices for the next election and our outlook. Because Paul was on to something when he said the Tory agenda. Now, we've heard lots of people recently, a common thing in the lobby you'll hear or see on Twitter is the ideological split. This is the biggest ideological split there's been between the parties for a decade or so. I wouldn't necessarily buy totally into that. I think that probably puts Labour and the Tories too close in previous years, but we are going to see this government get on with policies. We're going to see them push things through. Kwarteng has just announced, as we are speaking, the reverse of the national insurance cut. We have the moratorium of fracking going. We have bankers' bonuses. We will have a lot of things to do with imports and exports, aim to boost Brexit or whatever. And we'll have to have at some point crunch time regarding the protocol on Northern Ireland. They will have to stick or twist. I don't think there's the patience in the White House for this. And at some point, I know I'm probably saying this in passion and hope, they'll have to do something about Stormont, right? Well, we'll presume so. This is all rather important because whilst that is pleasing to a lot of Tory voters or Tories, you might say traditionally, there is a grey area of voters who, depending on circumstance, could vote either Labour or Tory, or even be picked up by the Lib Dems.
Why would a working class person vote Tory, for example? Just explain that to me.
Quite a few reasons, and I'll try to be quick. I think traditional media is one. I think local authority performance is another. I also think in general campaigning methods is another. I think people could sort of underestimate how important a good campaign is, or indeed a bad one, and also perceptions of parties. The Osborne era narrative on the economy really stuck around. That had a big effect on the working class, particularly when it was run for newspapers. But why might a working class person vote Tory now? It just really depends on what they want and what they're looking for. And the reason I'm saying this basically is because Truss and a team could push through these policies which have support with Tory members and Tory voters, but widespread disagreement with the public, that could be problematic for them, particularly when you're going for a starting position of we're about 30% in the polls.
On the
You
class.
make yourself more unpopular. Go on.
Sorry.
No, go.
I'm just not convinced that class really it counts in the same way. What do we mean by that anymore? I mean, is somebody who would have been labelled working class through their job 20 years ago, but now is retired with 4 houses, right? Are they still working class, right? The bigger distinction between voters now is education levels. It's higher education and it's age. And I think that what we're dealing with now in the modern political world, not just here, is tribes. People form tribes.
Okay. Well, take
very hard to move.
Yeah, you've been quite strong on the whole the state of the US at the moment, and I was actually quite staggered by this. So the NY Attorney General, if you've missed this story, basically came up with claims that Donald Trump has grossly exaggerated the value of his properties in both Florida and New York for tax purposes. He then responded on his platform and called her Letitia Peekaboo James and basically revived claims that she was a racist after she sued him for fraud. This man is still going to get a lot of people voting for him in the next month, and I despair for, if I'm talking about climate change, do human beings actually deserve to inhabit this planet? Sometimes I wonder, Paul.
Oh, humans are definitely fundamentally flawed. And I think, that's probably always been the case. And I think it's all just been exaggerated in the 21st century because of the breakdown of traditional media and the shortening attention spans of social media, turning everything into a slogan. To take like Trump's, well, I'm going to call it criminality because it is, right, whether he gets charged or not. This has been out there for years. Like, I went to America in 2015 to tour the country and work on that election. All I knew about Donald Trump was he was a billionaire racist, celebrity racist, right? And he weaponized race all the time. That's all I knew. But because I researched things and I wanted to know this person, I read up on everything. And it was just so crystal clear from the word go that the man is a career criminal. His business is a criminal organisation, that all they've ever done is launder money and inflate their assets and lie about everything. And then you saw like his biographer, who wrote the art of the guy who wrote the art of the deal, who's Tony Schwartz, just touring the media studio saying, I know him better than you. You cannot vote for this man. He's a sociopath. It's nothing to do with politics, right? I can tell you story after story. And 4 times a day, a new story was coming out about, oh, he's been banned from owning children's cancer charities in New York. I mean, who gets banned from owning children's cancer charities?
Paul, how is he still popular? How is he still popular? I cannot get my head around this. You literally are shown everything about him. We don't even know how bad he is. We know 95% of how bad he is, and people are still voting for him. What are they? 4-11 to win the House in November, is it? The Republicans? And I absolutely despair. I don't get it anymore.
Well, again, I come back to the tribes thing. That is what's happened, right? You already had a 50-50 country that was very polarized, right? Regionally. And, one of the really interesting things that I sort of learned about America traveling around was the media thing that, we get CNN, we get NBC and ABC. Most people aren't watching that. You go to most states, you're getting an Uber and the radio comes on and it's the local radio, right? Most people watch local radio, listen to local TV, and the news is syndicated through Fox. So they're getting that nonsense all day long, and you try challenging that, it's really hard because I haven't heard anything, right?
Yeah, William. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
They're just locked into tribes, and it's the same with Brexit. It's the same, I suspect, in every country in Europe. If you look at it, right, people have been herded into tribes, and they just seek sources that confirm their opinions already, and even like the informed do it.
Democrats 94, Republican majority 4-11. This is for the House of Representatives elections in November. And the mad thing is, William, like Trump has been endorsing these lunatics, some of whom probably should be certified. But obviously, I don't know, the GOP is just in a really strange place at the moment. It's dominated by an absolute maverick, lunatic, racist, whatever else you want to call him. And it's entertaining, but it's extremely dispiriting if you believe in democracy.
Yeah, I mean, the GOP are in a tough place. I'll just get some bedding in here because actually, for the first time, we've just seen a bit of an anti-Trump move with our punters. Two movers. These are shorteners for the Republican nomination in 2024. Tom Cotton, 33s into 25s. Josh Hawley, 66s into 25s. We're now 6-5 Trump from 11 to 10. This is for the nomination. We've also pushed him out just a bit for the presidential election. On that note about Trump endorsements, they have started to lose more. Overall, in a general trend, they started to lose more. And that could really increase during the midterms. As an example, I know this is really generic and not deep diving, but Dr. Oz against Fetterman could be an example of a big name Republican losing because of that association. It's something to definitely keep an eye on. With regards to the GOP, they are in a rock and a hard place because much of the enthusiasm within that party now comes from the MAGA side. Right, it's where their foot soldiers are, it's where a lot of their money is, it's where their social media is also very much at, and also where the party infrastructure is. For that all to really work, ideally Trump would be running and winning, and if he doesn't, then ideally for them, he'd be endorsing and really getting behind somebody. I don't know if he's got that in him. My feeling is no. So you have this weird and odd position where Trump has to beat legal challenges, which are numerous and expensive and getting more and more risky, whilst also doing his thing, stoking up his base. And then all of that has to play out for them in public, where independents see it and presumably get quite turned away. And it's a confusing picture, I think, to read if you're looking for a long-term bets for or against Trump. I think the value might now be in either maybe going and leaning towards the Democrat side a bit for 2024 or whatever, whilst the prices are still like double, triple what they will be if, say, Biden confirms he's going to run next year or something, or maybe looking for a sharpener like some of our punters are doing.
Well, like I can explain away elections in the Chinese upcoming election to an extent. North Korea, I can explain these elections away in these autocratic regimes. If the Republicans win in 2024, why would you ever travel to the US again? I mean, literally, it's staring you in the face where this is going. It's fascism. It's fascism, and it's the more the internet is available, and the more we have the ability to check out things online, the more we have social media, the more stupid we're becoming. I can't get my head around this, Paul.
Look, it's terrifying. I've been terrified for years, and there's no question it's fascism, right? And it's a threat. It's not just a threat there, it's a threat everywhere. What I would say is I'm much more optimistic right now because of the Putin situation, which is...
Talk to me about that.
Well, okay, they're losing the war. I think he's finished. I really think he's finished.
Is it going to happen from within, or how is he going to be? I have thought this might happen because I didn't think Russia would be entirely behind this war. What's going to happen?
If I had to have a bet, I think he'll get killed by one of the oligarchy or the mob. You know, he's a mafia guy and he's bad for business. I mean, you even saw Kim Jong-un disowning today, right? He's got no allies left. Right?
I actually missed that. How did I miss that? That's one of the greatest things ever. If you've lost Kim Jong-un, you've lost.
You've lost, yeah. And I think this mobilisation will just be a disaster. I don't think people will go along with it. I don't think it'll work. And I think since the war became, it became really clear they were losing about 10, 12 days ago, you just saw a stream of things. First of all, it came out in America that what I've been saying for years, that Russia spent $300 million in Europe and the West trying to interfere with politics. The Economist even published a list of all the parties who are direct beneficiaries of it, right? And I think that war is being won. I think the war that Biden is leading, I think Biden's doing a fantastic job on that front. They passed a thing the other day, disclosed about banning dark money from political campaigns. This is really important, really, really important. So I do think that can be won, but that's not going to change the Republican Party overnight, no way, right? I do think Trump is finished, and I think some of the people around him are. And it's interesting talking about the betting moves there, Will. I think Tom Cotton's an interesting candidate. I think Tom Cotton will run. He's very much from the hard right, from the South, Arkansas. I see him having a big following. I'm not wholly convinced by DeSantis after this outrageous immigration stuff that he's getting straight out of Russia. Straight out of Russia. That's what they do, right? And I could see it backfiring a bit in Florida, because if he doesn't win that governor's race by a big margin, that will very much hurt his credentials. So I think maybe this is the time to be looking for a big price on the Republican side. So Cotton is one, and there's probably people who aren't even in the betting, like Tim Scott maybe. I got a guy on Betfair. I'm not saying he's going to win, but I got a feeling he'll run. Ben Sass from Nebraska. I got 500s on Betfair about him, president. You know, I think those are the sort of people we should be looking at. And I think the Democrats, the winning party, are overpriced at the moment. About 5-4. I'd make them favourites for.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I'd have some faith in Americans that this might work out. 5-4. I'd agree with that. William, we have 3.5 minutes before we wrap up today's show. As I mentioned, lots going on all around the world. The fact that China, to my understanding, is at the moment having one of the worst droughts, if not the worst drought in human history, is barely not even getting in the news. But a 96-year-old died. What else have you got for us?
So next week, well, this coming week, the end of
we
this
also
week,
have Bolsonaro as well, sorry, who seems to be losing, seems to be comprehensively losing. We'll talk about that in the weeks to come.
Yes, we will. We will be going international as well as domestic in the weeks to come. There are indeed elections. We've touched on Brazil. I believe there's the matter of a government still to be sorted out in Sweden, Italy.
Italy's quite interesting.
Yes, indeed. Interesting, important, quite a bellwether for Euroscepticism and its popularity within the EU. I'd imagine there'll be some betting opportunities of some kind from Italy. And for the domestic fans, party conferences, two party conferences, really quite big ones. Because this is another sort of reset. The task is different for Keir Starmer and Labour now. What are we going to see this week coming up in Liverpool? Touch wood, I shall be there. And what am I going to see in Birmingham for the Tories? Because we got a new Prime Minister. They've got, if they can get this right, which is a very tall order in itself, time to set their agenda ahead of the next election, which they're pushing on at haste with. And we've got the small matter of so many policy crises, it's difficult to sum it all up in the time we got left. So those will be very important. And speaking of also, for those who really think the cabinet will crumble under the pressure, we do have a market on the first cabinet minister or the next minister to leave cabinet. Truss and Braverman are joint favourites at 7-1. However, in a cabinet full of allies, I quite fancy Chris Heaton-Harris and Kit Malthouse. Chris Heaton-Harris has taken Northern Ireland, basically. And that's an extremely difficult job to do well if you're talented. And it just doesn't seem like yet the Truss premiership has the strategic thinking I think needed. So 15-2 looks a big price to me. I don't see any good news from him soon.
I actually think he mightn't be the worst for Northern Ireland, just from my little reading of him. But we are a polling station of contradictions. William Kedjanyi, with a beautiful African heritage, vaguely pro-monarchy. I'd have to say Paul Krishnamurty, one of the most left-wing people I know.
I'm pro-event. I am pro-event. I am pro-event and pro-experience. And I'd do it all over again.
I don't know where that leaves me. That was the polling station. Hopefully we'll be back after Paul's outburst. I'm not sure he'll be alive next week. If he is, we'll have the polling station.